All right. This is the meeting of the San Mateo Union High School District Board of Trustees. I am calling the meeting to order. Today is May 16th, 2024, and it is now 5 p.m. I'm going to start with roll call. Go ahead, Trustee Griffin.
Present.
Trustee Chavez is not here yet. Trustee Jacobson.
Present.
Trustee Land will not be present tonight, and I am present. Tonight we have a team from Hannah Interpreting as our Spanish interpreters. For those who would like to attend the meeting virtually in Spanish, that option is available. Hannah Interpreting, would you please communicate that for us this evening? Thank you.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. In order to provide language access, this meeting will have simultaneous bidirectional interpretation into English and Spanish. If you're bilingual, you don't have to click anything. But if you're not bilingual and you're using your laptop, locate the icon shaped like a globe at the bottom of your screen, click on Language Interpretation, and then select English. From your iPad or a phone, locate the three-dot menu in one of the corners of your screen, click on Language Interpretation, and then select English. When you speak, do so at a moderate pace because the interpreters are going to be simultaneously interpreting everything you say. A efecto de proporcionar acceso lingüístico, contaremos con interpretación simultánea bilingüe al español. Si usted es bilingüe, no tiene que presionar nada. Pero si usted no es bilingüe y está en su computadora, busque el icono en forma de globo que encontrará en la parte inferior de su pantalla, haga clic en interpretación y después seleccione español o Spanish. Desde su iPad o su teléfono, en unos segundos, busca el menú de 3 puntos o que dice More en una de las esquinas de la pantalla, haga clic en Interpretación y después seleccione Español o Spanish y después Aceptar, Finalizar o Done. Cuando hable, hágalo en español y las intérpretes estarán simultáneamente interpretando todo lo que usted diga. Gracias. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. If you wish to view closed captions of this meeting, please view the meeting on the SMUHSD board meeting YouTube channel. The link to the YouTube channel can be found on our website. You may view the captions in English as we live stream our meeting tonight, and you may view the captions in a variety of other languages if you choose to watch after the meeting has ended. Viewers may request additional accommodations by calling 650-558-2201. For our deaf and hard of hearing community, we have a team from Hannah Interpreting Services, and they will be interpreting our meeting over Zoom this evening. We would like to ask everyone to speak at a clear and reasonable pace for our interpreters. Thank you. Okay, we will move on to adopting the agenda. The Board of Trustees may either adopt the agenda as presented or make a change to the agenda through a motion, second, and majority vote. The Brown Act prohibits any additions to the agenda without a 72-hour public notice for regularly scheduled board meetings. Are there any questions or comments from the Board of Trustees or Superintendent with respect to the agenda? No? Okay, great. Are there any questions from the public?
There are none.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, I would like a motion to approve the agenda.
So move.
Thank you. Motion by Trustee Griffin.
Second.
Second by Trustee Jacobson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And there was no discussion and no oppositions and no abstentions. Thank you. Motion passed. Going on to the special presentation. Go ahead, Superintendent Booker.
Thank you so much. I just want to welcome everyone to our board study session on artificial intelligence. We have a great team that will be presenting this afternoon. Really looking forward to learning together, but also just engaging in dialogue, because it's what you'll see later on in the slide deck is it's very likely that we'll be coming back to the board and the community in the fall or winter to look at possible policies to support our use of artificial intelligence with our teaching and learning with educators and students. So why don't we go ahead and start the slide deck. I'm going to do a quick bit of introductions and then I'll be handing it off. So again, I want to welcome everyone. We can click on to the next slide. Thank you. So we're going to do some introductions, goals of today. We're going to maintaining our focus on high quality teaching and learning. This is really what this is all about. This is not about AI being the new shiny thing that grabs our attention, but really, how is this an instructional tool for teaching and learning? We're going to look at some of those tools and the categories they fall in, some of the current uses here in the district. We have a guest presenter, Richard Zappian from University California, Berkeley, to give us some guidance, considerations, some of the initiatives that are happening. We're going to look at policy considerations, have some public comment, and then really get into discussion. Typically, our board study sessions are about, around 45 minutes of presentation, give or take, and then a good hour of discussion and conversation. So am I going to go to the next slide and then hand it off to Dr. Kemke?
Good evening. So I just wanted to talk and put the presentation tonight in a little context and talking about how does this actually relate to what's going on in our schools. Throughout time, every time there's a new advent of technology, folks get really excited and think, oh my gosh, this is going to change everything. Now we're going to do everything different. And really that hasn't happened. Our systems are really resilient, and that's good in some ways. In some ways, we do want to think about it. There are some parts of the system, it's kind of this comic that I have up there. There are some parts of the system that are really resilient that kind of perpetuate some inequities, where we know we have systems in place that sort students in certain ways and really rely on particular skills that we want to see students have. Really the promise of technology, the promise of artificial intelligence is this idea that we're going to start moving towards an educational model that really is about centering on the students' interests, their needs, and personalizing it more for them. And the other thing that I just wanted to mention is that our schools have stayed the same structure for a very long time, probably for 100 years. This idea of the industrial model of schooling is very much present in our schools, where students are set up in specific classrooms based on content areas that are really decontextualized with the way that we do it in the real world, right? We don't go and do math as part of our work. It's contextualized within a larger subject. And so really moving away from that industrial model of schooling is part of the promise of artificial intelligence, part of the promise of technology as it's always been presented to us. So, and I think we really begun to shift as a district to think about how do we have teachers that are more facilitators of the learning rather than being the ones that hold all the knowledge, because we know now if you want to answer a question, you don't generally go to a book anymore. You'll say one or two phrases most likely. You'll say, "Hey Siri," or you'll say, "Alexa," and you'll ask a question. And I mean, my young children do this right now, and they're already using artificial intelligence. And some of the questions I'm glad that they're asking of AI, because I wouldn't be able to answer it off the top of my head, like, how cold is Neptune? And as a teacher, sometimes if in the traditional model, you'd be like, well, I don't, and like you try to remember, it's actually negative 330 degrees Fahrenheit, just so you know, because it's come up in my house a lot. But really the point is that we want to start teaching students how to be good. They have to be able to ask good questions, right? And part of that is even the way that we use artificial intelligence. It's one of the future careers where I think it's actually a career right now, is a prompt engineer. Like, how do you ask artificial intelligence a question so that you can get some good answers? You can go to the next slide. And, I did my own little experiment in trying to come up with an image, and you'll see it here on the screen. I was like, okay, what is critical thinking? Hey, Siri, I didn't use Siri, I used Canva, which has a artificial intelligence program in it. And I asked it to show me critical thinking. You do not want to see the images that came up for critical thinking because they were actually just kind of creepy. This one was creativity, is the one here. So really, this idea of moving away from the factory model of schooling, which is part of all of our efforts around being a more equitable school system is more about focusing on students' skills, their ability to take the knowledge and apply it and understand how it works in context. It's not that we don't want them to know things still, but how do they distinguish between the things that are real and the things that might be deep fakes? And we know that that's becoming more and more part of what we're seeing out there. And really, we want to focus on how we can create critical thinkers and developing the skills in the students that would distinguish them from the machine. So when I say that, like, we don't want to have students that are just able to regurgitate single informations, you know, in a very discrete way, because that's what the machine is already doing for us. So we want them to be able to develop the skills to interact with this technology in a way that's thoughtful, meaningful, and allows them to have a fruitful future in whatever careers there may be out there. And what distinguishes us as humans is that we're collaborative, we're creative, we have empathy, we have the ability to consider the ethics of the decisions that we are making. And AI doesn't have some of those capabilities. And so that is, and I think that's a lot of what our presentation is going to be about tonight, is like, how do we develop our humans to interact with the machine in a way that is powerful and maintains the humanity in us as well? And it really has been the heart of us thinking about humanizing pedagogy. It is centering our classrooms on the students, their interests, their backgrounds, on what they think is interesting in the world, and creating our classrooms around that and the questions that they want to ask the world and find answers to. And it, you know, I think right now, if we move away from that more factory model of education, we really start to tap into the amazing, I mean, I think sometimes we forget about it because I forget what superintendent called it, ding dongs that adolescents can be, but the amazing elasticity and capacity for their brains to learn and to take in information and then apply it is beyond what, you know, as we grow older, we know that capacity is not there anymore. So taking this really precious opportunity that we have, the 4 years that we have them, making sure that we're adapting to this world. Because the technology has been there for a long time. And I think that our schools have been a little too resilient. And, you know, I don't think that we want to rush into any changes, but I think we really need to think about how we start to leverage some of the things that we're learning about tonight in a way that ensures that we're staying centered on the kids that we're teaching. Because I think the last thing I want to say around it, and then I'm going to pass it over to the people who are going to talk about the actual things, is that this is really about us centering it on the students, and that it's not going to take, like, AI is not going to take the place of a teacher, because we still always need those human connections. And that's the way that humans learn, is that they learn through social activity. And so all of that kind of rhetoric has been there for a long time too. And I just don't think it's right. It can help, and it can make our teachers' jobs easier. It can make our jobs easier. But we need to, like, approach it with that tendency towards keeping the human at the center of it. So I just wanted to open with those thoughts because I think it's really important to center the conversation around, like, what we want these future classrooms to look like. So with that, I think I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Brian Simmons.
Good evening, board members. Thanks for the chance to talk a little bit about this. Before I'm going to need to advance the slides. This chunk of the agenda is really around, like, what are we talking about, and what does it look like in our schools, and what does it look like elsewhere in the region and in the country? But before we review sort of some of those categories of AI tools, I want to really emphasize one of the reasons we've got to lean in understanding this is that we have a long history of not effectively redressing the so-called digital divide in our schools. And that, you know, not all of our student groups have experienced technology access, right, equitably. And that so much of AI potentially really kind of has this real opportunity to create a kind of massive accelerant on those inequities. And I think part of why it's important for us to lean in and kind of understand what this is from a critical eye is because if we don't, we leave a lot of our students behind, and their classmates are already probably leaving them behind already. And so it's really important for us to think to not shy away, to not be, you know, kind of numbly sort of just implementing, but I think to be really conscious of and critical of what we do, but we do need to do something because ultimately, at the end of the day, the question is who is ultimately empowered with these tools, and who's not. And right now, we could predict who would be and who would not be. So this is sort of a simple slide that I got from this organization, Teach AI, that really kind of gives you a simple kind of, and in some ways, Dr. Kempke's been talking about some of these issues. What AI is it's everything from online shopping to robots to the ways that NASA creates images now. It can kind of construct or help fill in holes where there are images. Foreign language translation. If any of you have been paying attention to this week's media coverage, the Chat GPT 4.0 has got some really interesting stuff around translation now, but also mapping and navigation, right? Many of us got here probably today using a mapping app. What it's not alive. And I think one of the things that I've actually been picking up lately that I think is be something for us to all think about is that when we refer to these tools, it's probably really good to not personify them. Maybe some of you've heard of the concept of hallucinations that these tools have, and I think there's something for us to think about whether we should use that kind of terminology about these tools. They're not people. They're not hallucinating. There's something that's happened in the code that caused them to do whatever they did. But I think this idea that that they're hallucinating is something we should keep thinking about, whether or not we want to use those kinds of terms. And so it'd probably be more appropriate to use terms like mistake or error. But I think that notwithstanding, AI is also not all the things that are listed there. It can take many forms in this contemporary context. So this slide is really a nice summary of the various forms of AI we see in broad consumption. You've probably seen lots of these before, at least the names of them. You might not be familiar with all of them, but the chart was created by the EdTech writer Betsy Corcoran. She was the person who started EdSurge a number of years ago. And she shared this with us at the convening that the superintendent, Dr. Kempke, and I attended at the county office a couple of Saturdays ago at DTech, actually, who was really leaning in on AI, which is an interesting point. It's good to read the chart from bottom to top, actually. There are AI tools that many of us are already using at the bottom, right? Probably everybody on their devices in this room is probably being, prompted to, if you're starting an email, you get some help to get started. But those have become those are already in wide use. They've almost become kind of ubiquitous. Then there are these sort of core, what are called generative AI tools, right? At this sort of the big boxes there at the bottom. Lots of and so OpenAI is sort of one of the big ones you hear a lot about. I just referred to Chat GPT. That's who is underneath ChatGPT, Google's Gemini, which is actually part of our kind of core suite of tools as a district. So we have that for staff already essentially turned on in our district. Microsoft's Copilot, and then Anthropic's Claude. So these are all the sort of core AI platforms. There are others, and there are people making new ones every day. And then lots of companies kind of tether themselves to these large language models. And so above the large language models are some of the associated platforms that use each of these, and she tried to associate like what goes with what, right? So DALL-E, maybe you've heard of before. It's the one that makes images. I'm not sure if you used Canva, but DALL-E is one of those. And these are hyperlinks. If you go on the slides, you can actually go to these things. But the point is, these are all different. They're all associated with each of these different platforms, and then even more specifically at the very top of the chart is then sort of education specific AI tools that we're seeing emerge. And this is by no means a comprehensive list, because that would be 50 slides at least. Like lots of educational technology, it's business, and people are trying to get to be first at lots of these things. It can be overwhelming, even choosing how we know what exists, how it works, and if we want to actually use it in our classrooms. And that's something I think we all need to sort of sit with is, some of us at this table are decision makers about do we buy this or do we not buy this, or do we contract with this company or not? And it is honestly overwhelming to think about, sort of which of these things, if we should invest in any of these, and which of them, because also like our cell phone bills, like our cell phone plans, it's probably a long-term commitment once you've committed to something. As the pandemic taught us, we have some ongoing tools that we use in the district that we started during the pandemic. And so just quickly, these are some of the ways in which people can sort of use these tools. We're seeing administrators begin to use certain using AI tools for sort of communications, for some data analysis, and some repetitive tasks can be accomplished. I think for teachers, you can see some of these kind of, there's a model in educational technology adoption called the SAMR model. And so we're really very much in like the when the first part of that model, when people begin to evolve in their understanding of technologies, they substitute, right? You use a computer to type something instead of handwriting with a pencil, right? So the idea is we're using a lot of tools currently for substituting basic tasks that we do. And then for students, and honestly, this probably just scratches the surface on what students are doing. My sense is that students are using it for many things that adults have yet to even know that they're able to do with them. And so I'm going to now hand it over to my colleague, Dominic Bigu. I think he's been advanced onto the slides there. He is our instructional technology coordinator. There he is. Hi, Dom. And he's going to now tell you a little bit about what's happening actually in the district. And Dom, just say next slide when you're ready for me to advance.
Will do. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It seems as though that a lot of the AI influences have been kind of coming at teachers from a variety of different ways. We've definitely have had some teachers that have been curious to see where the value add is in some of the areas that Brian alluded to, and a lot of folks just in general just are trying to kind of use the benefits of AI to support them in leveraging time in ways that supports the instructional design that they can develop to personalize a lot of the resources and scaffolding that they're helping with students. At this point, we've seen that Dr. Kemke mentioned that the science is really in the prompt engineering. And the more specific that you can kind of develop a prompt towards the machine, the better the results. And you'll see that in this example that I'm sharing you with right now, there was a push to figure out how to support multilingual learners in a science class. And the box on the left is looking specifically at a body of text that was just copied from a specific resource that the teacher was looking at. It was a chapter guide looking at a specific science unit. And in that, the teacher then directed, after copying in the text, asked the bot to identify scientific vocabulary and language that could be broken down by root, suffixes, prefixes, keywords, cognates, analogies, and so forth. And each of the sections was very specific in terms of the types of terms that they're going to look at, even down to the very end when he's thinking about global scientists and trying to make connections back to students' countries of origin and look for scientists that had specific, cultural backgrounds. The responses were immediate and quick. And from that, he was able to generate a number of other kind of opportunities for them to bring those words in, create study guides around them, have kids become more fluent in those responses, and really saved him a significant amount of time just in that design. But I think why I chose this example was how specific the prompt engineering was and how, he didn't come to this in his first iteration with the AI, in this case, ChatGPT. It's kind of a dialogue that you enter with the device. You ask a question, maybe it doesn't give you the exact same answer. What you have the ability to do is to refine that prompt and then dig in a little bit deeper and challenge it to continue to refine and build down until you eventually get what it is that you're looking for. Go ahead to the next slide. In this example, there was a world language teacher that was also using AI via Bard, and he often would take these times to kind of draw out these biographies on different popular characters and pop culture in his Spanish class. And it'd take him some time to have to go through them and write them out in Spanish and then kind of figure out what language to use that was appropriate and so forth. In this case, he decided to try his luck with Bard, looking at a cultural pop character referred to as Peso Pluma's a music artist. and something that would have taken him, 20 minutes to kind of pull together at the beginning of class, he was able to use Bard just to first ask for a biography for Peso Pluma, and then realized it was too long, threw in another short phrase, to basically shorten it. Hasta esta biografía más corta, right? And shorten it. And then from there, he took it and dropped it into a Google slide for class and had essentially a discussion topic that was, took him literally 5 minutes to make. And it was something that was current. He knew his students would get a kick out of. He had music that was aligned to it. And and then they could use this as a conversation tool. So really quickly being able to kind of find high interest or design high interest material that aligned to some his specific instructional goals for a conversation starter that was going to be in class. Let's go ahead into the next slide. This example, I think, is a little bit more intriguing. There was another science project that a teacher created that was in support of building out a mini documentary project for science. He, through the use of School AI, was able to kind of design a chatbot that would support students in the refining of their topics and in the progress through all the steps that they needed to complete that specific documentary. With the use of School AI, what was unique as well is that he was able to load his project description, have it aligned to the standards specifically that he was teaching, as well as some of the resources that he wanted referenced in those responses. And then as the students went into the project, they had this essentially a personal assistant to talk to them regarding, clarifying questions as it related to the topic. And if you look on the right-hand side over here, what was cool is that every single student conversation that the student had with the chatbot was basically put into a spreadsheet where he could see how each student was engaging with the bot, could see the questions that the student was asking, could see where the bot was actually trying to reinforce the teaching that the teacher had directed it to. And then even within that, there's data analysis tools that will, within a School AI, that kind of remind that will alert the teacher that one particular or two particular or three particular students are having a difficult time with the specific concept. And in that way, it was kind of providing him data for areas that he could then go back and reteach with the larger group or a smaller group of students that were struggling with the similar issues. And he's kind of gone to town with the use of these AI kind of chatbot personal assistants on a number of different projects that he's gone on to do, from writing resumes with students to, attacking specific content areas that he's had challenges with and so forth. And the amount of personalization that is able to happen in that instance where, you could imagine being one teacher trying to have that in-depth conversation with 35 students in an hour and a half long period would be next to impossible. He's able to kind of create this experience for them and monitor it and kind of aggregate some of those the questions that come up for his students and address them. So kind of an interesting look at how AI could be used as a personal assistant. And then the last example I'll share with you, just in general, the way we've been using this is there is a resource out there called Ask Your PDF, and what it's basically doing is allowing you to create your own personal chatbot around any specific initiative that you're interested in. And in this case, I was playing with some resources that would support our new teachers with the use of the CSTPs. There's a document referred to as the Continuum of Teaching Practice, and it's close to an 80-page document that does a really interesting job of providing concrete examples of how teachers are implementing our 6 CSTPs. And what the Ask Your PDF does is essentially creates a chatbot based on that specific document. And so I can query that document as it relates to a specific standard I'm interested in, whether it perhaps the the integration of technology to support discussion in the classroom. And when you ask the document that, it'll go through that 80-page document and find all the references that are made to technology and its support of discussions in classrooms, and it'll provide specific examples. And when I ask it to to cite its sources, it pulls back all of the pages and standards that it's currently referencing. What I thought was unique about this is just the potential for us to kind of create resources that are targeted to specific programs or initiatives that we have. And so we're already kind of thinking around, well, how could you have a chat bot that supported, for instance, the district's framework for learning, right? Or you can even build out an entire knowledge base that might reference 5, 6, 7 kind of like guarding frameworks. And then they would all be kind of questioned and used in the analysis of, whatever prompt that you engineer. So kind of a really interesting way that could be used. And then just in terms of what the outreach that we've been doing with staff, and this kind of goes back to our professional development that was at the start of the year. You'll see that, there's basically a bonanza and everybody jumping on board to think through where AI could be used in a variety of different tools. And these are new tools that we are not necessarily currently licensing, but that are all jumping on the bandwagon, as I mentioned. And some of them are very unique and what it is that their specific niche, if you will. So for instance, DFID is looking at designing UDL documents based on whatever inputs you have, and universal design for learning. And that could be in support of scaffolded vocabulary. It could be in support of, looking at discussion prompts, structuring academic writing. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And so our teachers at that professional development, after kind of seeing some work that was shared with them of design thinking that our teachers had done, I got to experiment with a lot of these, and there was quite a few light bulbs going off of folks that were really excited and thinking about how they could streamline and support and adapt some of the resources that they were using to share with their students. Go ahead, next slide. And as just an example of kind of this bonanza, this is one particular tool, Magic School AI, that's been pretty popular because it basically has generic prompts that are built into it that a teacher can just go click into and then feed certain pieces of key content knowledge or standards and things like that, and then it'll generate whatever it is that you're interested in. And the key point here, and back to I think what Dr. Kempty was sharing, is that the machine has lots of knowledge, but what it doesn't have is the understanding and the context of your unique situation and the community that you're serving. And so I think that's where that critical eye of being able to take something that is generated it and then continue to refine and tweak it and go down. I mean, I keep hearing the term thought partner put into the mix, and I have to say that's really what's been kind of unique about this, is that right now the strengths that I've noticed is that it's particularly adept at processing language, right? I think language is where the emphasis has been. And so just having a conversation that challenges you to refine your thinking, bounce it off of the AI, and then kind of come back and revisit what you were really getting after. It is really unique in how you can support that type of dialogue, if you will. So I think
Thanks, Dom.
that's where I'm at. Sure.
Thanks very much, Dom. Dom was going to stick around because we'll have questions and answers, and he may provide us with some answers later. I want to now introduce Richard Zappian, who's a professional learning coordinator from the leadership programs at the office at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Education. Mr. Zappian is the coordinator of the California Computer Science Project there. He's also been convening a leadership series with education leaders across the Bay Area called Ethical AI for TK-12 education leaders that just concluded for the year last night. He will provide some statewide perspectives on how AI is being approached in other contexts, as well as some guidance around some ethical considerations for us.
Press the button. All right. Well, thank you all. Superintendent Booker, thanks for being here, for having me here, and of course, members of the board. It's a pleasure. Hopefully, I can add some value to what's already been established. And there's definitely a couple key points I want to connect to. This idea about humanizing pedagogy, and this idea that Dom was talking about is aligning AI to current priorities, right? And so those are some of the things that I'm thinking about here. Just sort of some context about this, and then I'll talk a little bit about the course that that Brian was part of. It was actually a year ago. So if we think about the trajectory of this, OpenAI came out in November 2022. And then, a year ago, May 2023, the Office of the U.S. Department of Education Office of Ed Tech, they put out a report called Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Teaching and Learning. And that's really what we're all talking about here. And the purpose of this document was really to describe what AI is, right? What AI is, and then, of course, what is generative AI and how it could potentially support educational goals. It also established risks, that there's risks involved, and it sort of identified what those are. I think ultimately it started a national conversation about plans and policies for higher ed, but also for TK-12 education and how we can implement AI in a responsible way or not, right? Or not. And then there was this approach about thinking about AI through an equitable lens, meaning think about biases, consider fairness, and the impact of students while exploring these tools. Shortly after, the state of California, the CDE, released its own guidance. And then there was a series of webinars to talk about what AI is, how it can be used. There was coordinated efforts between the Computer Science for California initiative and the California Computer Science Coordinator to establish ongoing professional learning throughout many different county offices of education throughout the state. And then there's this resource kit, which you see sort of labeled here. And within that, I just wanted to highlight the bullets here or the arrows rather, that are here, and sort of talk about them. The first thing about this foundational belief, and it's been mentioned here, is that technology can never replace the connection that a teacher has with a student. All right, we just have to make sure that that's really clear for everyone. That's fundamental in all this work, right? Educators and students need to learn about AI, how it works, and its impacts in order to restore and really ensure for a responsible use of AI. We need to remember that as what Gen AI is, it makes decisions that appear to mimic human thought and human expression, right? And it's really just making predictions based on data. That's really what it's doing. It's not thinking. We talk about it's getting smarter. It's not smarter. It can't be smart. It doesn't have a brain. It makes predictions. And it learns how to make better predictions based on inputs that it gets, right? So that's these are the things we have to always remember here. And now, again, and Brian was mentioning this, just 2 days ago, OpenAI released 4.0, which is really, it's not just text, it's not a text-to-text chatbot, it's images, it's videos, it's audio recordings. And so really, if you think about that, that brings up questions about privacy. And I'll get into that a little bit. If you look at the demo videos, you'll see nothing of that. And that's another thing as well. So all the tech giants, and they're pushing their products, and that's fabulous. They are businesses. We have to remember that we have to look at things from, again, it's been mentioned here, a critical lens, right? So safety guidelines is really, we have to make sure, much like we do for all of our educational technology now, we're ensuring for data privacy, security, and transparency. And this thing about transparency is, where's the data coming from? And if you've done any research on that, OpenAI and Google, they will never tell you where the data comes from. So we do know some large pictures of this, but they won't specifically tell you, which could be problematic. So definitely, as it's on the ground, these are the things we need to be asking for, right? Principles of universal design for learning, that was also mentioned by Dom, should be guiding the use of Gen AI to ensure inclusive access for students. We need to make sure that we're engaging families, students, and teachers, and they should be prioritized. Again, that's what you're doing here, right? I will say, in my exploration of the state of California, it's not happening in a lot of places. So I really, again, congratulate you for really engaging the community in these discussions. We have to think about how AI collects data and think about its use in social media, right? Students are using this all the time. And we have to think about how that impacts their social emotional state, right? And these are definitely things for us to consider as well. Fundamental skills. I think that, well, I don't think it's listed in this resource kit here, that if we think about it from the perspective of computer science, this idea that we have to teach students and educators to understand algorithms, data analysis, and programming, which are fundamental for AI development. In the computer science standards for California for K to 12, your kids are not actually building AI systems, but to be able to understand how they work, I think is really critical. Let's go to the next slide. So there's a lot of research on, let's say, ethical concerns, and that was the sort of the title of this course. Well, actually, we called it a community of practice. And the purpose of this was not to look at and decide which of these AI tools, systems, to actually bring into schools. It was really about thinking about ethical concerns throughout the time. So we looked at the work of Leon Furs very often. He was, I believe he's Italian. He's an international consultant, author, researcher, really focused on generative AI and the impacts on writing instruction and education. And he leads us to really think about a couple of things. So in thinking about bias, AI data can lead to biased discriminatory output. He reminds us, but again, you can look this up as well, that all these tools are based on massive data sets. So they did something called the Common Crawl. They grabbed everything on the internet. Well, if you've done any searches on the internet, you'll find anything you're looking for, but you'll also find lots of stuff that you would never venture to look at. And that includes, of course, hate speech, pornography, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's all in there, right? It's just all in there. And we have to just be aware of that, right? There's, again, racist, sexist, ableist, discriminatory language, right? We just have to be aware of this. So when we think about all the things it can do, just know that in these systems, this language is there. The environment, I think it's an important piece, and it's often not talked about. AI technology impacts environment through mining, energy consumption and waste. Energy consumption and water as well are big issues. I was reading something that it takes approximately 4 to 5 times as much energy if you want to do a queue through ChatGPT than it does to do any Google search, right? It's been estimated that by 2027, in terms of water, the demand for water to cool systems and to also provide electricity, it could be half of what the UK needs itself. So these are major questions that we should definitely be thinking about. And I think about what amazing opportunities in terms of earth science or natural sciences. Kids should be studying this and thinking about this, right? So it's not just about the use of AI, it's the impact of AI on our earth and our ecosystems. Truth. Hallucinations, right? Misinformation, deepfakes. We've all heard about these things. And this all began because, again, that these models make statistical predictions, right? And again, find any prediction that, like weather, whatever, that's going to be accurate. It's just not the nature of it, right? So let's go into the next slide. Copywriting. So if you are to create, let's say, a song, I know Superintendent Booker likes to write music. If you create a film, you write a book, these are all things you can copyright. But anything coming out of a chatbot cannot. And so the question now has to do, there's actually a lot of lawsuits about this. People that have actually created works of art are finding their works found in other places, generated by these chatbots. And so that's where the litigation is actually happening right now. Of course, major companies are not taking any responsibility for it. They're just at the receiving end of these lawsuits. So again, it's a discussion to be had. If we have students write using ChatGPT, is it their work? These are questions I know that are actually happening in schools all the time. But again, we need to be thinking about it. And related to privacy, again, all the information that is collected and available on the web is available out there. And so if we're talking about students, we need to be thinking about how does that connect with the FERPA laws that we have and the expectations that families have that their data, their students' data is being protected. And these are certainly things we need to be asking. At the end of last year, a coalition of 19 groups sent a letter to the Education Department and the Office of Science and Technology asking for further guidance on the use of online monitoring. What they found in a related report is that 2/3 of teachers reported that software blocks LGBTQ and race-related content, which is amounting to, let's say, a digital book ban, right? 67% of teachers said they knew a student who had gotten in trouble due to content filtering or blocking software. So again, there's lots happening here that we just need to be very aware of. Datafication, anytime we like something, we share something, we look something up, data is being collected on us. And so again, if students are doing this as part of any project in school, data about them is being collected. What we don't know right now is what happens with that data, let's say 5 years from now when they're out of high school, right? We don't know, let's say if we're using data to track, let's say their academic progress in math or language arts, what happens to that data if they go to college? Are they unfortunately tracked in a particular class? So these are much larger questions that we definitely need to be asking as we implement these tools. So next slide, thank you. I referenced the United States Department of Education framework in their report. And LAUSD, I realize it's a district that you cannot compare it to San Mateo Union, but it's 500,000 students, I think. But the framing, I think, is important here. So the idea here, first of all, in the framing is that AI and generative AI can support personalized learning. And I think I've heard that here today, right? That's definitely something they're very excited about. And they have found and they've identified opportunities to prepare students, staff, and families with clear information about AI technology. They're interested in fostering digital citizenship, and they're committed to utilizing AI technologies in a way that is responsible, ethical, transparent, et cetera. And so these, again, are really important pieces for them. The idea about humans in the loop was mentioned earlier as something that's really key. And I think in the next slide, we'll see some of what they actually consider as their priorities. So this idea about vetting, let's see. What they do, much like we're seeing here, actually, they involve their information technology services, different district departments, the Office of General Counsel, the Office of Labor Relations. When we think about bringing any software or models into their schools, they use and they bring it forward to these different committees. There's also the ISTE seal. LAUSD is really excited about the ISTE standards. Again, that is the, let's see, the International Society for Technology and Education. And in addition to standards, they have the seal, which is aligned for digital pedagogy, technology usability, and ISTE standards, right? They want to align all that there. So again, it's something that's really positive for that particular district. They also focus on 5 big ideas. And again, this is really related to computer science. It's really like how AI sees the world. It's through sensors and in the case of chatbots through text, right? Representing and reasoning, computers construct representations with data structures, right? They do not reason like we do. Learning, machine learning, right? And large language models, they use statistical inference to find patterns in data. And then this training data is then applied and then used for other predictions. And then the other thing I wanted to mention about that is also societal impact. They want to make sure that when they're teaching their staff, their teachers and students, they understand the impacts of these tools. Yeah, let me go to the next one. So Palo Alto, similar, I won't necessarily say demographics. I really can't speak for that, but in terms of numbers of students, they have about, I think, 5,000 there. Their framing and their guidance is a lot shorter than LAUSD, but I actually think it offers some important considerations for you all. So first of all, they started with 3 different committees. So the 2 high schools, they each had different committees, and then there was a district one, which I think is a really nice way to involve different people in this process. Their guidance pointed to the acceptable use of AI, the ideas varied amongst teachers, right? And they needed to establish some clear guidelines there. So the next slide speaks to their principles. So their principles are academic integrity, innovation and learning enhancement, transparency and accountability, and supporting teacher decision-making. Again, I think through their panels and their committees, they're doing that. They want to make sure that they're teaching AI skills and fundamentals. They want to level the playing field. And we heard that about, the digital divide here. Security and privacy are important for them. They're also focused on enhancing learning for all students. And the inappropriate applications, the things that they do not want AI to be used for, you can see here. They don't want it to be, we had this discussion yesterday, and I went back and looked at the text. And it's students are prohibited from using Gen AI to substantially complete assignments or exams. That could be, I don't know, substantially could be partially or full. I don't know, depends. Including entering exam or assignment questions. So you can't use it for that. And then they also, which I think is really interesting, there's no one size fits all. We need to be thinking about this from the perspective of the students. They also add a series of other questions, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but a couple I think are important. How do we, it's actually not on a slide. How do we support different learnings, including students with special needs? How does the use of generative AI redefine the concept of learning? We heard that here. And what changes does it bring to the education process? How does the use of generative AI impact equity, bias, and and how do we ensure equitable learning for all? So they don't have answers for these, and I think they're what's available online, and again, it's linked in the slide deck for anyone, is these are questions that they're thinking about, which I think is what we all need to be thinking about, right? The next slide, please. Alisal Union is in Salinas. And if you don't know the area, it is primarily Latino. It is agricultural, where I think this idea, actually, I found it to be really interesting. We had the director of EdTech in our community practice a few months ago talking about the way they're working. And they're really focused on, as a way to enter in the conversation, in professional development for teachers. They cannot begin to think about how to use all these tools. And I think that's what Dom was speaking to as well. We have to have professional development. What I really think is interesting about this particular situation is that in some communities, we might think that, oh, that's an agricultural community. What do they need AI for? Right? What do they need to think about technology for? And their whole perspective is, actually, we need to, because our students of color, need access like everyone else. So I really found that to be a profound sort of example. I will say that from speaking with the director, after we shut off the cameras and everything, that not everyone in the district believes in the use of AI there, or that students need to be afforded these or access to these tools, which again, gets into questions of what equity really is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are we here to just continue with the models of education, giving access to the students that already have access, or are we trying to change things?
Mm-hmm.
Their guiding principles, I think, are really, again, I think I've mentioned a lot of these things, that these are all things we see not only here, but in the other cases. But again, they're starting with the entrance of let's have teachers play with some tools, right? Let's have them try some things. And then the questions that come up will generate further learning. So I think that's all I wanted to say about some of the work we've done. And my hope in the community practice that we led is that people think not only about how to enter in discussions with this, but also how to bring students. We talked about this yesterday, how to bring students into the discussion. Students, they're using these tools right now. We need to make sure that we understand how they're using it or how they think we can use it. So I'll stop at that.
Richard, thank you very much for that. I'm sure there'll be some questions in a moment. I know we're coming, we really want to go faster to this is, and again, all this is in the memo, but basically our initial kind of thinking, I apologize, whoever's moving the pictures around, we should probably move them back where they were, but basically just to ensure that, so these are some guidance that we've gotten sort of from some other sources, but basically it summarizes Simon and his data security team continue to ensure that our formal uses of AI exist that they have formal relationships with the California student data privacy laws. And that's certainly work that they're doing. And you can ask him more questions if you have questions about specifics around that. And simultaneously, that we will provide at the beginning of the school year a simple set of communication documents that provide guidance to students, staff, and families about the opportunities, risks, and ethical issues that come with the use of AI. And that's really like just a basic kind of thing, like some, in many ways, buyer beware sort of information in all the languages we need to do it in. And that document will also be very clear about the responsible and prohibited uses of the tool. So we're sort of clear together what we mean and what we don't mean. And then finally, we will also update any relevant policies in the fall related to academic integrity. And then this is just a kind of quick timeline of what we're thinking we're going to do in the fall to really engage stakeholders in this process. I'm going to stop there. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Superintendent Booker. So.
Well, I'll just say, I mean, lots to process, right? I mean, this is a lot of information, a lot for us to process as educators. I think we'll be leaning on neighboring districts and other educational experts to help us craft policy to bring to the board. But to prompt the conversation this evening, what initial questions pop up for you based on either presentation topics tonight or things you've heard, things you've seen, things that your own kids are doing, using, or what you're seeing teachers do, or even in the media?
I think we're supposed to have public comment first.
No, last.
No? Yeah. Oh, it's on, it's for.
Yeah, we'll go to board comments and
I
questions.
see. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so any comments or questions from the board? Go ahead.
I think this is very informative. So I want to thank you, everybody involved. I speaking from as a parent, my perception is, or my experience is, that AI is here and we can use it wisely. And I do think there's a lot of classroom assignments. My daughter is a senior in our school district. There are several assignments. Some of them are the government class, right? All students take 1 or 2 government semesters, I think probably 1 semester, and they need to figure out who sits in some of the seats that are elected. So they're not going to fly to Washington, D.C., of course. They're not going to go to the library and search it up because that's outdated, right? Every 4 years, you could have a new term. So if they need to figure out who is the Speaker of the House, they're going to, I know there's a new verb we invented about 10 years ago, Google it. They're going to Google it. Who's the Speaker of the House? But if it helps them learn, I think it's a positive. I think where we're going with this is, or where I'm going with this is that we don't want somebody to not, we don't want a student, at least I don't want my children to have a paper that's written fully by AI and not themselves, not their own thoughts, right? But I'm ancient myself, so I had an encyclopedia from the 60s. And I would go through the encyclopedia for a subject. One time I did a report on King Tut. I went to the library and I grabbed about 5 or 6 books and the encyclopedia I had at home. And I'm handwriting because we didn't have computers, in the 80s, 70s and 80s. So I'm handwriting this. It was in the 80s, actually. I know you guys are laughing. It was the 80s.
Yeah.
But I think that today's world, I think students should absolutely be familiar with the library. I don't think we should ever stop enhancing our libraries. But of course, it's efficient to Google it, get a few sources, read through it. You take pieces of what you learn from each part of it. I think that's very helpful and that's very useful. I'm not an advocate, or I don't believe that we should think that it should be okay to have a student use someone else's words, such as AI. Write me a 500-word essay about King Tut. Boom, it's done. I think Superintendent Booker showed us some examples, and it can be done in 15 seconds or quicker, right? So I don't think that that's a good approach, but I do like the fact that students can find multiple sources. And I just threw out King Tut because that was a report that I did as a student in the 80s. So, but I do think finding multiple sources to cite and reading the research, seeing pictures, I think online, I think that's, I think we've come a long way with AI. I'm concerned that somebody could just ask AI, what's it called? GPT, whatever. Okay. And so that's my concern is that the students are going to forego the learning process of reading through the material, picking out and selecting what they want to have in their paper. But I do think it's great that we have the resources right there at the fingertips for
Mhm,
information.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. I was talking with Richard earlier about how one of a friend of mine, her friend is a doctorate student at like UCLA or something, and she's a TA in one of the classes. And so the students had turned in their work and she graded a bunch of them and failed some of them. And they were like, why did you fail me? Well, because you didn't write it. How do you know? Well, because she knows by their writing samples and the way that they articulate information. So there will be safeguards, right? I think it's important to also acknowledge that it's like, like we were saying earlier, it's not going to have its own brain to like then take over the world, right? It's controlled also by humans as well. So there are errors, but I mean, that's all human error too, right? From the codes and the way that you train it, right? So so maybe you can speak a little bit to the safeguards and the different types of just like what people can do to for the integrity of work and all of that.
Maybe I'll start and then I'll hand it to you. I will just say internally, we have a particular partner that we work with, maybe even Dom. Is Dom still around? Is he still? Okay. But we have a particular partner we work
Yes.
with, Turnitin. Turnitin is kind of the big dog in the sort of plagiarism business in most educational institutions. I think they have a formal partnership with Berkeley. And so they do track, again, they're claiming, I think we're wondering if these tools, because kids who are really in the know, they're pretty good at laundering
yeah,
this stuff,
for
right?
sure.
Like they can sort of launder the text in ways that I wonder if we're going to really be able to catch
But we
kids,
kind of
if you
all
will.
wait,
So
right? Like
yeah,
people used to buy
yeah.
papers, from others before we even had the internet. So
Sure. So yeah, so we have
there has been people that do that.
we have a
So
particular partner. I want to just defer to you in terms of like broader things people are doing to try to address academic integrity. I mean, we have some other ideas, but
Well, I'll see if I can add to this. In terms of safeguards or guardrails, we don't have any in this country. I mean, that's one of the problems here that has been stated many, many times. I know that Europe has worked on many. I believe China as well. The United States continues to talk about. There was something I didn't really fully read it yesterday, but there was a discussion something that I was beginning to read. Chuck Schumer describing how, we're not quite there with our guardrails yet, like with thinking about generative AI. And I think that if we look at the European example as something that potentially we could do internally in all spaces, they have they create a risk system, right? From minimal to unacceptable. And if we think about students and privacy, if we think about that as really important, then perhaps we need to be thinking about all the possible ways in which data or AI could be used to harm students, to release their data. Then we need to look at all those possibilities and have real hard questions with the providers of these tools.
mhm.
I think we could do that without the guardrails per se, because we've read about Zuckerberg and Sam Altman going to Congress and talking. We've read about these things and nothing has happened. There's no guardrails that are on the horizon. We have to do something about it internally. We need to take control,
Mhm.
right? Which that whole idea, humans in the loop, that we're
Mhm.
realizing we're not going to allow any student data to leave the space. Even before this, all ed tech, so much of ed tech, all their data was again collecting data, and we're just allowing this to happen. I do believe we need to put a stop to that. So it doesn't answer your question specifically. I also think there's power in the discussion.
Mhm.
There was a group through the Bay Area Writing Project recently, and I got to listen in on some of these discussions. And really, what was happening is and there's been a paper that's come out of this. They got teachers together to look at student work and to talk about cheating. Because we know that everyone's talking about cheating, right?
Right.
Academic integrity, cheating. And so they got people to look at the student work, and the teachers talked about what they saw, and what they identified as a series of different tensions, right? It wasn't so much like a black and white like policy of what students can do, but tensions around what happens when they see something that might look like the student might have copied it from somewhere else. Like, what do you do? And they had these discussions, and I think that is the magic, right? The magic is like, if you have a doubt, then maybe you go to the student and you actually have a conversation with the student, or, you go to prior student work, as you were mentioning, right? I think that's the thing. There are these AI detectors, and they have been proven to be not accurate, especially for African-American vernacular speakers and for multilingual learners, right? They think that, oh, this language is not accurate. This is not, or you copied this because this couldn't possibly be your work. We need to be like not letting, I think, those tools they should not be detecting, or frankly, maybe we don't even worry about the standard 5-paragraph essay. Maybe we need to rethink what we're doing. And that, if you think of UDL, let's say a 5-paragraph essay used to be the way in which you demonstrated knowledge about something you read about and learned. With UDL, the representation, an expression, you need to be thinking maybe it's a video that students create. Maybe it is a slide deck. There's many other possibilities that we should be thinking about.
Yeah. Sorry, I just want to say hi, Don.
I was just gonna, I'm doing well, thank you. I wanted to add to that too, and I think Mr. Zappian, hit the nail on the nose there. I think it's about when we think about what we're asking our students to do is really to develop critical thinking and synthesis skills. And that's not just knowing knowledge, but it's the application and the understanding of that knowledge. And I think what we see here is, when we think about how students demonstrate learning, is we have an opportunity to kind of reframe what those assessments look like, so that, as you mentioned, UDL, perhaps we go more towards expecting students to complete some forms of performance tasks that really kind of require them to take that information and work in a study session group such as we're having right now, right, where you see that they have the knowledge, but more importantly, they understand how to apply it in the context that we're providing them. And I think, I would question that, any teacher that's asking kids to answer questions that are just Googleable at this point, because that's not necessarily getting to the critical thinking that we want them to apply. And so thinking about our local context, thinking about issues that, relate to the students in our neighborhoods and in our families, like how do we challenge them to take the concepts they're learning in class and provide that, contemporary context and put themselves in it, in their interactions with, organizations and nonprofits and community speakers and so forth, right? I think that's what's exciting to me, is it really is a kind of a wake-up call. If we think learning is just regurgitating knowledge, well, then we've lost the fight. We really have to think about more critical ways that we can challenge students to take action in their learning. And in that action, it will be authentic. And there's no AI that can do that for them, right? So.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yes, Trustee Chavez.
Thank you I think the conversation is great. What you were discussing right now made me think about the critical thinking. That is really what we want to develop. And I just remember, I don't want to say back in my era, but back in my days in the 80s, it wasn't about critical thinking. It was about memorization. So you take a math test, whether it's algebra or calculus, you have to memorize the formula, and you memorize it. I remember writing it out 10 times, 20 times, memorize it, get the test in your hand. I would immediately write it on the top or the side. The days I didn't have it on my hand, I'm just kidding. But did that help me become a critical thinker? No. And then kids today, when I'm out with the group, I have my daughter and a group of friends. And if I say, hey, I want to leave a 20% tip, how much should I leave? Oh, well, we don't know. Okay, well, let me just make it a little bit easier. If our bill is $60, well, what's 20%? Okay, what's 10%? Okay, $6 times 2. $12, right? Critical thinking, but not necessarily about memorizing formulas, because you can create a formula for the tip, right? But then if you don't, you're not going to carry around a book of formulas or even on your phone, right? But just, you can always ask Siri though. If I would give a 20% tip, my bill is, but all of us go out, I'm sure, and we always see the examples at the bottom, but making sure that those are right, right? I do want to also mention that some positive, I guess, workings of AI is that I think we have Mr. Simon here can tell us, Mr. Bettis can tell us that we have a computer program that runs, I don't know if it's every night or every few days or once a week, regarding the students' communication. So I would say last year, I had a car full of teenagers, and they said a couple of our friends and one of us we had to go to the school office and answer. We were being interviewed about something about a fight. So they had a dialogue about a fight that didn't happen, but they were thinking it was going to happen. So they were wondering, how did the school district, how did our leadership at our high school know this? So I said, did you have the dialogue using a school issued Chromebook? Yeah. I said, so well, how could they look through our dialogue? I said, well, when we do our enrollment packets, we always have a box that you check. And I think it's a good thing that we're allowing, right? We're authorizing to have that check, right? And I know that we have an amazing technology department here, an IT department, but I don't think we have the bandwidth to go through 9,000 students and what they're talking about. So I know it has to be some sort of AI generated program that's scanning through. Is there fight? What are some trigger words? So we can prevent some incidences at school. So in some cases, AI has been around for a number of years and it's always to our benefit. Is that correct, Mr. Bettis? We have a program like that?
Well, we certainly have application that searches for keywords, but we're not using AI per se because as you know, as we all know, that when it comes to data privacy, the regulations are significantly different from for high school in compared to college and universities like that, right? So, so we're not using any AI at this moment, right? But it is computer generated.
Computer generated, yeah.
Our teachers and staff do have access to AI tools. However, it's not. It's basically used for individual testing purposes and things like that.
Thank you for that.
Anybody else? Does anybody have any? Oh, sorry. I keep interrupting you. Did you say
Totally
something?
fine. I was going
I'm
to just say,
sorry.
I think so the other thing I'll say about your example, because I think it's an important one, is that part of why I think a lot of, and myself included in 1994 or 5 when I started teaching, did what we did in terms of the regurgitation of information was that it was easy to deal with that information in a way that if I had asked all of my students all the time to engage with me in really deep, complicated ways, I didn't have the capacity to do that. I think the example that Dom gave of this partner in the class to sort of help with some of that does provide, I think, like we now have these tools to help with some of this, assuming we've got the right tools in place and all the caveats we've been talking about. I think we do have this real opportunity for like deep personalization that's honestly just not been possible in this at the scale that we've been that these tools potentially could provide us.
Does anyone have any more questions or comments?
Sure.
Trustee Jacobson? Or
Okay, all right. So yeah, I just want to comment and say I do really enjoy the examples that were shared and the thinking that we're doing about how can we adapt and rethink how we assess knowledge from our students. How do we meet the content standards in a way that is still, maybe the way to say it is, I think, Randall, we had a conversation about, was it 4 C's? Remind me what the 4 C's are: communication.
Put me on the spot. Critical thinking,
Sorry.
creativity, communication, collaboration. I think there's 5 though, isn't there? I'm missing one. Anyways, but to your point.
But yeah, the point is that these are essential skills. They can be assessed in a multitude of ways. And I think that's what I'm receiving here from this presentation is that's the kind of thinking that we want to do is how can we, so that sounds great. One of the concerns that was brought up earlier was bias in the models. How are you going to assess in terms of, the providers that you use? How are you going to assess that?
I mean, I think this is a collaborative effort, right? Like, I think this is collaborative, meaning like us and lots of other educational institutions. I mean, I think that we're gonna rely on our partners. I mean, I think there are some organizations like Digital Promise, like SMUHSD, that we're going to start to really kind of, I think, lean on to help us, because in many ways it's impossible for us to kind of evaluate all of them down to the gory details. So I think it's going to be really using trusted sources, if you will, to help us, you know, from a variety of perspectives about what that means. But I think that's a big piece of it, will be sort of, and again, I think we're all as district leaders across the region. I mean, I was just struck by the convening that we had at the county office with other district leaders, superintendents and others from across the region. And it was a wide range of like understanding, knowledge, engagement with this topic alone. I mean, you sort of referred to that like it's pretty quiet in a way that I was last night in this convening we were in, I was talking about, like, if you sort of contrast this moment with the Common Core, and some people on this board were on the board probably at the time of the Common Core. I mean, the Common Core was a big deal. Every institution in the state was sort of and an educational institution was engaged in either arguing about it or advocating for it. And so this is interesting, kind of eerily quiet in my view, kind of. And again, partly because I think we're all just a little bit overwhelmed and unclear how it's going to all shake out and what it means for us. And so I think there's a real a need for us to kind of collaborate across the region to really kind of create some of these norms around what are the kinds. So we do share, we do connect. I don't know if you want to add anything.
One of the things I was going to add, I'm comparing this educational tool of AI with the educational tool of a Google search bar. When I ask Google a question through a search bar, it's going to give me information. And let's say it provides articles for me to read on a particular topic. Well, then I can look at the author of that article. I can research that author. I can, by researching that author, maybe learn about that author's point of view, bias, background, what's making that author write in the way that they're writing, or take whatever stance that they're taking on this particular topic. You can't do that with AI so much. You can ask AI a question, it's going to give you an answer, and it's going to be biased because it's grabbing information from the internet. That's what it's grabbing, right? From all these cajillion sources that are written by humans who are inherently biased. So I'm a little, let me say it in the positive. I think one of the big tasks ahead of us for ourselves, and especially for our students, is teaching our students how to suss out and recognize the bias in AI's answers for us. And that's really hard right now. I'll speak for myself. It's really hard for me because I type something in there, it gives me a response. I'm so happy that I got the response so quickly. Like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to grab it and go. And it's rare, actually, sometimes for me to pause and go, is that right? Like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah.
And Trustee Jacobson, you and I've had this conversation quite a bit. One of the big things, if I can like boil it down, that I want our students to learn how to do is to look at their world with that, whatever context they have, whatever lens they have, and just stop for a second and go, wait, what? Like, wait, what? I don't really, I want to start asking some questions rather than just hook, line, and sinker, hook, line, and sinker, hook, line, and sinker. I don't want robots, whatever you know what I'm trying to say. I don't want just robots. Like I want our next generation of humans to stop and think and ask questions. Like for instance, you brought up this idea about the water consumption. Never would I ever have thought of that. That is a brand new concept for me. Like, oh yeah, all these data centers, all the machines needing to be cooled, and all the stuff you just talked about. Never thought about that.
Yeah.
And yet, right, 3 board meetings ago, whatever it was, we had all the climate students come and talk about climate action and utensils. And what about what he just talked about? Like, wow, I don't know any of that. And that's, water consumption. We just got out of a drought in this state.
Yeah.
So those kinds of questions and understanding bias and sussing it out, this is where it gets to, I think, your point about the 4C, like critical thinking is so
Yeah.
important with this tool. All right.
And also, you know, talking with the families about that. How are we going to get all the parents, you know, to understand what their students are using? Perhaps we do a session where, you know, parents and students can together create something through AI or whatever and start teaching them how to, you know, how to um differentiate between all of this information on what is, because we should already be doing that with the articles we're reading, right? Just like Superintendent Booker said, like, who is this author? Where are they getting their information from? What kind of bias? Things like that. But this is even, you know, going further where there might not be that chance. And so how do you teach the student? And then how do you teach the parent to identify that in their own life? Because as you know, as parents, we all use technology as well. So go ahead.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to go back to some of my opening comments because it's very much related to this idea that really the teaching has to be centered on the student and their ability to start
Mhm.
experimenting with some of the tools so that they can begin to distinguish if there's bias there. Because there's also a general expert in the room. So if they are, you know, asking AI to prompt an essay for them, which I think is part of what we want them to be able to do, is instead of saying, oh, they're cheating, if they ask AI to start them an essay, instead they're getting some prompts and some ideas and some thoughts around how they can generate their own.
Sure.
But in the room, you have a relative expert and the teacher on that topic who can
Mhm.
say, oh my gosh, you just got a whole bunch of garbage there, you know, or
Right.
there's some bias there. So that's why that's why we have school, right? Is that we're putting students with someone that can help guide them on how to use these tools in an ethical way. It also centers the human in it. Instead of it being about the tool being able to do all these cool things, it's like, how does this tool help me develop? And the bias that's in the tool is because we have human biases, right? And I think that
Mhm.
piece of it is a really great question for students to be talking about and discussing in their classes. Why do those biases show up and why it's partially because of the people that have created these tools. And like, we could just go on to this really great conversation that students could have on their own. But really it's been the conversation. I don't know if you all know this, but I started out as a teacher at New Tech High, and it was back in the day, we all had one-to-one in the early 2000s
Mhm.
using Lotus Notes, which was like this, you don't know if you know of these things. And it was really like, we're revolutionizing education.
Mhm.
And we did do things differently because the students had the access to it. And so we were talking about like, how do we create critical thinkers? And our comprehensive, more traditional schools have just not caught up to it quite yet. I think we are attempting to do that as a district. I'm proud of the work that we're trying to do with humanizing pedagogy and thinking about how do we shift our classrooms to be more about a facilitation of learning rather than someone telling them, you know, here's the history according to, you know, Miss Kemke or whatever it might be. But it's more about like, let's ask really good questions. Let's ask ourselves, let's ask the machine, let's see what answers we can come up to. Let's ask the wise ones in our community as well, so that we still are centered in the humans.
Yeah.
And I think that always has been, I think, the benefit of technology-enabled classrooms is that it allows us actually to focus on the human and our interactions rather than having one person hold all of that knowledge.
Yeah.
And it's not dismissing some of the wisdom that our teachers have. And a lot of that has to do with the things that I think frustrate us most as adults, is that the teachers are teaching them the social skills and the collaboration skills and the critical thinking skills. And we don't oftentimes think of that at high school. You think, oh, well, that happens in kindergarten. But do you think adolescents don't need a little help on like,
Right.
so, and that's really why you have teachers, the humans in the room, to help them kind of navigate in that way. So, I think there's a lot of exciting things to do with AI, but I think it's all about us thinking about how to shift our pedagogy to be more about the facilitation of learning and less about the memorization.
Right.
Sure.
Because we're never going to be faster at holding all the information and spitting it back out than the computer.
Yeah.
And memorizing does nothing
Yeah.
for your.
Nothing. Uh-huh. No.
No, it actually just fills your brains with like useless information
Information,
that I
yeah.
sometimes wish I didn't have anymore.
Right, right.
I used to try to memorize those formulas and there's after the test, try to make sure I could just let it go because then you're on to the next subject, right? So I was playing that game of memorizing, put it there and dish it back out, but it's hard. It's really hard.
Trustee Griffin, thank you.
Like,
Sorry.
thank you for taking time out to fill my head with stuff that I don't understand. And this is my second presentation today on AI, and the other one was going 180 degrees away from where this crew is going, which is, one of my problems with the US and probably the way we're attacking AI as a tool or a threat is everybody is kind of taking it on by themselves. And it's kind of, I'm trying to think, and I wasn't around when they invented internal combustion engines or when the airplane first flew, and then all of a sudden everybody figured out we can make a car. Oh yeah, we can go build one. And you had all these people haphazardly doing things. And I guess that one of the things that came up was the S curve of technology. And while you're going to be adopting stuff, it's going to be gaining on you. I mean, how are we going to be productive in that kind of an environment? It's kind of like going from pencil and paper to the first PC, to the first IBM PC. That's a real challenge.
That's I don't know. Well, I'll give it a shot. I think a question that I think about is, I think of some of these tools as solutions without a problem. Like some of these tools can be great. There's no question about it. Like again, the new chat 4.40, it allows you to have simultaneous translation at the moment, right? So you have a device and it hears, like I'm speaking in English and it's interpreting in real time into Mandarin, or you name the language. So these are potential innovations that can really change and provide a lot of students with greater access to what they're learning. So there's no question. Some of the things, do we need them? I mean, I question that. I think something I think about is like, I go to this idea about what is important, what are the priorities, or what are the frameworks? And the reason I say that is like, that first slide talked about, again, SMUHSD was really rooted in the framework of the Department of Education and their priorities because it helped them ground their decision-making. So the one thing that I think about, and we've talked about it here, is this idea about UDL, right? Universal Design for Learning. Again, how can we rethink, it's been brought up here, how do we rethink education and how can these tools fit with that? So I just brought up an example of this new tool which can do simultaneous translation. But there's other things that it can do as well. How could that possibly, like, let's think of an assignment where we've removed the barrier, a language barrier that might have existed in a particular classroom. How might we rethink, instead of creating, I'm going to generate a text with a lower lexile level for the student because their English level is not as advanced as his other child. Like, that's what we're thinking. The idea about SAMR, this substitution, right? The child is not as advanced in English, so I'll use the tool to create something less advanced. What if we don't need to do that? What if we're able to speak, like I said, I'm in one language and it comes out another language and the child is doing the same tasks that everyone else is doing, right? So again, I think it's what our frameworks and to guide our work. And that's what I think a lot about is if we are having students, another video that you'll see also as they're promoting this new tool, it shows, it's his first name, Sal Khan. Sal Khan is with his son and they're doing, I think it's a geometry problem. They're talking about triangles. And I'm thinking, okay, you have this great tool and you're doing something that isn't a textbook already. Why? And it's a tutor. The whole idea, it's a personalized tutor. How many students that are not doing well in geometry are going to go into the corner where there's a computer and figure this out, or look at this tool, trying to figure out, let's say, where's the right angle of this particular triangle? Are they, why don't we think differently about the assignment itself? I mean, that's to me what I think about.
Yeah.
And how many kids are going to want to go to a computer as opposed to a human?
Right.
That's another question we have to ask.
Right.
You know, one thing we didn't, and what we sort of talked about, the primary focus a lot this evening was students learning, kind of students doing something, but we really didn't talk about the impact on instruction, the pedagogy, as you guys, as the educators like to say, and classroom lesson plans. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of potential there to, you know, to teach the content standards, except I think all the content standards just are going to change. Because I mean, you know, the stuff that we're trying to teach now is drill and fill facts and not necessarily be, you know, dig into, and there are things like deeper meanings and stuff, but I think our content standards are pretty rigid and they're pretty set, and they assume that you have no access to a lot of facts and understanding. But we got to figure out, well, what's the new facts and what's the new understanding, because you have all this other capability that kind of says, you know, you could figure out what year the Battle of Hastings was, or what the importance
I think we were in a meeting yesterday with Ken Montgomery at DTech, and we were talking. He's like, I mean, he's pretty bullish on all this stuff, and he was saying, like, they're having a conversation about, like, what are we trying to do here now? Because the fundamental things we've used school for in the past are going to be done by something else. And so, yeah, like, what is the core curriculum? What is the core set of activities? And again, I think if we lean heavy on critical thinking as our kind of main goal, right, then I think we probably won't be wrong. I just think what its application is, and I think our and certainly continuing to pay attention to who's developing which skills among our students, and because currently we can predict who's developing which skills for the most part. And I think we're trying to bend the curve on the predictability of those outcomes. And I think that piece we talk a lot about, try to work hard on. It's what's at the center of this humanizing pedagogy kind of framework is really all about that, right? It's really all about how to put the student at the center of the work, and then ultimately, but I think you're right. I think the skills that students are going to need. But unfortunately, as Julia said at the beginning of this presentation, we've probably been organized to teach students for like the 19th century for a long time.
And I will say that content still matters, right? Like, we still need students to know particular things, whether or not our content standards are still organized in the way that they should be, probably could be questioned, I think, for sure. But what the hope would be is that we start to center the classrooms around really important questions. And, one question that would come up tonight is, like, how do we cool data centers in a way that doesn't use a lot of water? It could be actually answering some of the questions to the problems that we have as a society. And if we set up our young people in classrooms to start asking those and trying to solve some of those questions, we might actually get some of the answers to them. And I think that would be the hope. Whether or not our systems and what we're required to do as a system is going to change and quick enough to, get to that point is probably something that we're all hoping for, but we're not necessarily there, because we do still have, kind of very static standards. But it is important for students to understand some of these concepts, because you're not able to apply anything if you don't have some of this knowledge in your mind. And I think so it's distinguished between the things that are really important to have as kind of the foundation knowledge versus the ones that we're just stuffing in the head in order to show that you know these things. And I think it's also redefining rigor. And rigor in previous times was the ability just to, how much information can you have in your brain, right? And then just bring it back out. And rigor now should be, how well are you able to answer the ask the right questions and find the ways to answer them in a way that actually solves them. Because as we know, like our society and the world has some major questions, problems that we need answers to, or we may have other, I don't know. We don't know quite what will happen to our world if we don't start answering some of them.
Mhm.
You know, one thing, this is a quick story. I had to make a big presentation today. So I got a guy who's 20 years, 30 years younger than me. And so I'm doing the first half of the thing. He's doing the second half of the thing. And his presentation's really improved. And we were talking after we got out. It's like a high level government deal. And he writes his presentation is written by GT4. It was at GT. And I'm writing mine based on 40 years in the industry, and kind of we're at the same point. So, okay, what's the point? I mean, we were talking in that particular session about subject matter experts. And, it's hard to develop. It's going to be hard to develop subject matter experts and probably master teachers, because a lot of that may go away in the future. A lot of stuff will be changed as we figure out what we're doing. I think we'll find uses for applications that we don't know what to do with. Just like we figured out MapQuest, and which I'm sure came out of a military thing or something somebody could do, and nobody quite kind of knew, well, what are we going to do with this? We can tell you we can tell you not the straight point from these coordinates, but we can tell you how to navigate that, and I'm sure that was sitting on a shelf for a long time. I got a question that's kind of troubling, and I don't see a solution. And the digital divide is likely, and I think we talked, if somebody brought this up, maybe it's you, Brian, and that digital divide is going to get even wider, because the people, the haves that have a little bit, every time there's technology, they tend to leverage it because of their culture, their background, their exposure to other things. So how do we overcome? I mean, we can't close that gap till we can bring groups from here as a starting point to, kind of up here or something. Has that been considered in this, or how do we apply it to better?
I mean, I think it's at the forefront of our this work. I mean, I think it's our approach as a district. It's certainly, our racial equity board policy prompts us to address these issues regularly. I think so we bring that lens to everything about how do we bend the predictable, outcomes that we see in a way that is more fair and more equal, more equitable at the end of the day. I think part of it is going to be, being critical consumers of this work, but not being afraid to learn and see and practice. I mean, Dom described some really great early adopter teachers in the district who are beginning to try to, move this, understand and figure out what this stuff looks like as it resides with them in our classroom. So I think there's a lot of stuff to be done, but I think it's about and continuing to engage students in it. I mean, I think other folks here tonight have already prompted this conversation about, talking to students, especially our marginalized students, around what are they seeing? What do they know? I mean, it's all over what they're using. I mean, a lot of the tools they're using are AI infused, from the social media tools to the phones to the whatever. I think they're just not aware. And so there's some easy entry points, I think, for helping kids beginning to connect to it. I don't know if anybody else has got any other ideas, but that's my thinking right now about how we're approaching this.
Well, I just think that leaning into it across the board, just teach everyone the same skills, right? But also this isn't sort of related, but I also worry about how much technology our kids are already, how many hours of the day are they already spending on screens? I think there's a lot to be said for having our students actually pick up a book and read it, pick up a pencil and write. We went to that English class that they had independent writing time, and they were writing on pencil and paper. And I was like, we need more of this. There's this, I don't know if you guys have seen it. There's a store on Burlingame Avenue that's it sells pencils and paper, journals and like book bags and like lunch boxes. And I'm like, who is the avatar? What is this? Who is this person that is buying like $15 box of pencils? And it's geared towards actually, I think, very affluent people who are like over it with, oops, sorry. They're like over it with the tech. Like we need to get back into like using our hands, engaging with the world, engaging our thoughts. And so I want to lean into it, but I also want to like preserve what everybody has access to, which is books, which is paper, which is talking face to face, speaking, public speaking. I don't know, those types of things.
Well, and that's kind of what Trustee Chavez was getting at, right, with libraries too.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people that is their profession, and I worked for a library for like 10 years. And once they started automating the checkouts, it was hard, because it's like you lose that face-to-face interaction with your librarian. The reference sections also were really tough. And then how many people are still accessing books? When they, I'm sure it was the same thought when they went from the Dewey Decimals to like, that to an online card catalog, it's kind of the same kind of thing. Nobody knows how to do that stuff anymore. So,
Can I prompt Dom really fast? Because I think one of the things we're seeing system-wide, and this may not be unique to us, I bet, is just a real post-COVID haze around technology in the classroom with teachers that we sort of lots of the same kinds of concerns about screen time and just also just that period had real kind of trauma that it induced in the system. And I think so there has been a fair amount of leaning out, leaning away from technology in the classroom. The challenge is that that's fine, except it means that for kids with means, it means that they're jumping ahead
right.
because they're using it. So there's this sort of and I don't know, Dom, if you have anything you want to add about this, because I think we've talked a lot about this over the last couple of years as we've come back. You want to say something, Dom?
Sure. And I think when everybody lost kind of the beauty of the community connection that was part of the pandemic, I think we were thrust into using tools in a way that created a sense of alienation and isolation amongst our student bodies that we know developmentally that many are still struggling with. And I think that the tools were we were lucky to be poised in the way that we were, given the infrastructure we had and the training our staff had to be able to pivot in such short notice to actually still engage students in a way that we tried to build that community online, and students teachers did an amazing jobs of trying to bring relevance and connection back into those 35 boxes in a Zoom screen. But I think when we came back to school, there was this exuberance of finally being back together, and with that, I think there's been kind of like a pendulum has swung a little bit like, I'm burnt out on using all these digital tools to kind of create collaboration and community when I have the real deal right in front of me, students that are coming in and who we can kind of engage in critical conversations. And I think that's kind of the beauty of kind of what our system does have, is that we have this like incredible opportunity to kind of leverage the diversity of ideas from all the unique students that we have that come into our classrooms on a daily basis. And when we think back to the conversation earlier around kind of how do we make these standards have relevance, we really have to work hard at it, because I don't know how many of you thought when you're sitting in a class, like, why the hell do I need to know this? What's the connection to the real world, right? And I think that, that is the challenge now, is to put problems that really matter in front of kids and really challenge teachers to pull from their body of learning that they have and expose our students to new ideas and really challenge them to address the issues that matter. When I think about, our digital divide and how important it is for, kids that are coming from such, diverse backgrounds and access to resources that are tied and wrapped around privilege. I mean, what an opportunity kind of to learn more about how a tool like this can help open up their world, and allow them to, self-actualize and to see themselves and learn from their peers to do things that are really like life hacks, around
Yeah.
improving the quality of their lives. And that should
Yeah.
be tied to the curriculum in some way, so that, when that teacher in an AP environmental studies talking about, resource management, there's connections to not only global issues, but local issues, that kids can get involved in and do.
Mhm.
So I think with our technology, it's like we're pushing back in slowly, and I think I want to do it. We try to do it in a way that's where there is really a value add. I think we talked about SAMR, and the R in SAMR is redefinition, right? Redefining the problem, redefining not the problem, but to me the opportunity we have when we have such diverse, and strong students with such unique skills coming together to kind of use this technology and leveraging it to kind of make those real world connections. I mean, that's what I get excited about, and that's where I think is infectious too for our teachers and our kids.
One group, oh, sorry. One group, I'll get back to you 1 second. One of the groups that I did want to address was students with disabilities. I mean, as an adult with a disability, it's a game changer. AI has been amazing. And, with like COVID, the lockdown was tough for a lot of folks, but it also gave people connection that are homebound and that are isolated, when everybody is out in the world. So what does this mean for students with disabilities? And like, can you give me some examples on like how, what are some maybe concerns that people have had, or what are some victories that people have had in thinking about all of this?
Go ahead.
Okay, I actually, if I could respond to the point that was made a minute ago, and then I'll come back.
Yeah.
I also want to acknowledge this question that you brought up about parents or people, they've kind of had it with technology. I'm a parent, and I get it. Like, parents see their kids come home and they're on video games, or they're speaking through Discord. Their whole life, their social life, is mediated through these tools, Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. What I think, and then through the pandemic, we saw the inequities that we talk about. We saw them up front. Remember that viral image of those two girls in the parking lot, the fast food parking lot? And how like it was an outrage, right? The community was like, how can this happen? And because it's always happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's all, we just haven't looked. The same thing in Oakland Unified. I remember they were trying to give materials out to people. They gave them all Chromebooks, and kids didn't have internet access.
Right.
So they had to then, okay, we got to double down. We got to create some hotspots, and we got to give those out. So, again, the idea of inequity is now coming out. It's been out. I know that in education, Gloria Latson Billings had this great article in 2020 about it's time for the hard reset, to rethink education. It's not working. It hasn't worked for brown and Black kids. And here's an opportunity. So I think that what I'm hearing today, and what as I engage with people about this, it's like we're coming around to like, we need to use AI when it matters, and not just because it's coming at us. And I think also about interventions. I think and this is again about students with disabilities. We often think we take, again, the replacement approach. Instead of this, I'm gonna just substitute it with this other tool, as opposed to rethinking the assignment from the get-go. Right. So I think that we shouldn't use these things unless we really have a specific purpose for them. That's my professional and personal take on these. In terms of the students with disabilities, I don't think we've actually had an opportunity to really fully engage in that conversation. And the reason, part of that, I think we are siloed in education. We have special education educators trained over here.
Right.
They primarily deal with reporting, with conducting IEPs, with assessments, working in small groups, when teachers want to work with them, they're not available. And that's not because they don't care, they don't have the time. We know speech pathologists as well in schools that have an ed psychologists as well have fabulous skills, and we're not bringing them into schools. We're not hiring them and really to
Right.
guide
There's
our
not enough of
work.
them, yeah.
There's not enough of them. We don't have enough FTE for them. So there's a lot of things.
Mhm.
I would say that frankly, I think it is something that we should definitely look at and have committees to talk about how to rethink assessments so that when we think about inclusivity and access, it's not just a term we throw out.
Mhm.
Like the assignment from the get-go,
Mhm.
again, I go back to the UDL framework, thinking about it. If you've got and we also think about, in the past, it used to be, oh, roughly 10% of our students have disabilities. It's not 10%.
No.
It's more.
Mhm.
It's very often more. There are many undiagnosed students.
Mhm.
There's students dealing with anxieties, lots of things that may not be classified as disabilities, but they're students that are having a hard time.
Mhm.
And so how do we create and rethink assignments, rethink what education is, and really help students and teach those social skills,
Mhm.
which are part of what a lot of the students need and why a lot of our students with disabilities feel isolated and stigmatized because they're not included. There's no intentional creation of community building in classrooms to make sure that all kids are seen and heard. So anyway, those are some thoughts I have. Hopefully I've addressed some of your question.
Yes, and I like the fact, I like that you brought up, like, it's always been there, but why haven't we noticed? Like, what happened? Why didn't we acknowledge the fact that it was, like, why did people have to have Zoom to be able to connect?
Mhm.
And now we're back to the same thing.
I
So,
just want to mention something
Mhm.
about the promise of artificial intelligence for students with disabilities. There are already some uses for students that I think are there. Adaptive learning is really powerful for students. We have students in our reading intervention classes right now who have programs that allow them to hear it being read to them and it's at their level. And a lot of these tools, I do think we tend to be siloed. We are trying to not be siloed in this district, and having
Yeah.
someone like me with both curriculum and special
Yeah.
education and try to
Mhm.
bring these two worlds together. But there is a lot of promise, I think, with artificial intelligence and thinking about how we adapt and have adaptive technology for students so that they're
Mhm.
able to access the curriculum through that. So I think there's what I would say is promise. We do have a lot of work to do as a system to make sure that we actually can
Mhm.
leverage that.
Thank you. Sorry, I promised I'd come back to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I know we talked about what I was gonna talk about. We kind of moved on, but I'll try to kind of combine what I wanted to say. So thank you. I think the digital divide, I think having all students equally have access, having the same tools, that's important. I think it may, what are your thoughts? I think it might bring the achievement gap closer instead of wider, because I'll give myself as an example. I grew up in Tuolumne County, so the county library in Sonora was about 20 miles one way from my house to the library, and that's 40 miles, even though gas was less in the 50s. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. I was not here in the 50s. I can't know you guys. That was a big cost for my family in the 80s. Okay. And so I would use my school library because we all took the school bus, went up the hill and down the hill, and the bus went 30 miles up and 30 miles back to the school. My school was 6 miles from my house. But of course, as a student, obviously I would go into the school library, which was about the size of half of this room here. So it didn't have everything at my fingertips, and my encyclopedia was from 1960. And, but once computers were introduced, I'm a mom, so my children have the luxury of being able to have a computer. So before the pandemic, there was some homework that was issued, and it was through a computer program for math. And I thought that it was a really great computer program. I don't know if it's AI, but it was definitely a computer program that if you got the answer wrong, you could click and drill into it more, and it would actually show you how to do the problem. it doesn't take the place of the teacher, of course, but it will help you because, some students just, is the answer 18? I just want to know. No, let's show you how you would get to that answer of 18, right? So I think that technology helps to, I think making sure that we have those tools in every student's hand. Internet, obviously, we need that as well. So when the pandemic came, I was on the elementary school board, and we found out that many of our students didn't have a Chromebook and many didn't have access to the internet. So of course, we worked with the local cable company, but we also issued hotspots. And I think that that helps providing tools for every student at least the same level, a Chromebook, internet access, so they're not driving to those places with the free Wi-Fi late at night, because we have a library in San Bruno, but before the pandemic, not every student had a Chromebook, and they needed to go to the library if they want to do the homework that was assigned, that was electronic homework, right? Like the math program I was talking about. So I think that, as any school district realized when the pandemic came, it was a heavy lift, and we used a lot of resources in the communities to make sure that every student had the tools needed. But so I want to see what your thoughts are about, to see if you actually think that because you guys are really experts at all this. I just know from my own personal experience, and I think that the achievement gap is actually not going to get wider because of making sure every student has the same level of access, same tools with at least a Chromebook or laptop, and then the internet, of course.
I think it depends. I mean, I think it depends on what we do. I think you're just bringing these tools into a system that's already inequitable. So it will only exacerbate that if we don't do something about it. I think, yes, it has the possibility of providing a kind of personalized experience that could potentially help kids grow faster. It's always been the sort of like the sales pitch that the tech folks tell us when they meet with us. And so they've not yet done that, right? So I've had lots of us educators in the room have had ed tech in our lives for 30 years. And every time when it was CD-ROMs a long time ago, or it was floppy disks or whatever.
Floppy disks. Oh,
I remember going to the
man.
Q conference and getting a bunch of those CD-ROMs back in the late 90s.
CD-ROM.
Yeah. Oh no, yeah. Soon to be changed. But but I think in those days they were like, oh my God, you could have the entire encyclopedia on this one little CD-ROM, didn't change things.
You have to buy a new version. If you had the encyclopedia on that, you'd have to buy new versions every couple of years. So that was another sales tactic as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Trustee Land.
I just want to apologize for my tardiness. I was a multicultural night at my school. I've been ripped my barong because I was dancing. But thank you for putting this together. And I'm sorry if I'm a little off script. But I have strong opinions about AI. And again, Terry, you mentioned things that, technology is a tool. And like Brian said, sometimes those tools can be advantageous to the privileged and those who need it and at risk. And I loved what we were talking about with Julia was talking about adaptive, I think AI can really help with creating stories with English learners and voice and creating and getting onto that. So there is ways to really help. And I think it has some real good applications. But I do know that I was at an articulation with our high school from being the middle school person. And we were walking around and a lot of the teachers were like, well, now I make the kids write the essays by hand. And that's what we do now. We're getting away from technology because ChatGPT is happening too much. And, because there's two sides to this story where, and I truly believe there's good in all of it. Okay, yeah, so you're going to write your essays now. Okay, it's back to the blue book, however we want to do it in college. But I think there has to be a mix. And I think coming to the forefront and looking at this. So I already did look at this slideshow. So the presentation. So, Dr. Booker and whoever put this together, thank you. I think this is really great to see how it could be utilized. But I think we're really going to have to mediate, plan, train, cajole, help. There's going to be a lot of people who need to grow into this and grow into AI being a tool that's effective and how to use it, because it can be misused. Clearly, students are misusing it in certain ways, and people are starting to see that. But also students are using it in great ways to really get better at what they're doing. and they're learning from it. So I think we have to, as with everything, we just have to look at both sides and kind of find the balance of things.
Mhm.
I think I think it is okay to be a little bit more Luddite and actually start doing the things without technology. Again, Yonder is a good example. Having the high school take away technology isn't a bad thing. It actually becomes useful. And so it's just that and again, I really truly believe it's really that balance of how to use it and really understand it. So I really appreciate this presentation today. And I rushed over here to say this, I had this in my head to say, we really need to learn how to use the tool. And if we really can train everybody to really use it effectively, it will be a powerful tool. But with every powerful tool, it could be a weapon and it could be something that's not helpful. So.
With that said, is there any more dialogue? Yes, that's what I'm getting at. Just want to make sure that our
Okay,
trustees
wait,
are-
I just do have one more thing to say. Another, just maybe one or two things to think about. One is, I know that it's on our list of things to talk about in future board meetings, but career pathways. I think that we should be really mindful about how we design and think about our career pathways with AI in mind, and how we can best prepare our students for the potential career fields that they are in. And also, there are some fields where, I mean, like, I don't know, auto mechanics comes to mind, but or plumbing or welding, or there are certain industries that our students can opt into that don't require technology in this way. That still requires using their
maybe.
hands.
They might
Maybe.
also need it too.
Well, these
And-
are things, but
yeah.
all the more reason to explore. Where's the
Right,
world going,
uh-huh.
and how can we design our career pathways
Mhm.
to best leverage our kids'
Mhm,
opportunity
mhm,
in high
mhm.
school to launch?
Yeah.
And then the other idea is how can we as a district lean into AI to cut costs and do things that that we can automate. And I know this might be touchy, but because we're just about to have a presentation about the logo, maybe I'll save it for that. But I'll just say this. My sixth grade twins are taking an online class about how to build a business, entrepreneurship. So their teacher has taught them how to use some of these AI tools. And this is where I think it can be very useful. It's because if you're trying to teach the skill of how to build a business, they don't necessarily need to know how to be a graphic designer. You can outsource that. You don't necessarily need to know how to, I don't know, I'm trying to think, come up with, I don't know, but the one that comes to mind is the graphic design, because they used Looka to build a logo. They used Canva to make a flyer. Those aren't the essential skills to the business part of it. And that's useful. So in the example that he gave in the biology class where they build a video, like, you don't need art to understand biology. You need to understand the biology, but you can use the art to augment the learning. There it is. Okay.
Okay, well, let's see. So if there's no more dialogue, then I'm going to go on to public comments. Great. Okay. Do we have anybody in person?
No.
No. There's so many in person, my goodness. All right, going on to online. Do we have any online folks?
I'm promoting Maria.
Thank you.
Hello?
Yes, go
Hello,
right
can you hear me?
ahead.
Hi. So I heard, I kind of came into the meeting kind of late, but
Hold on one sec. I'm sorry. You need to have your camera on.
oh, okay, sorry. Hi.
Thank you. Perfect.
Hi, my name is Maria Jin, and I have a high schooler and a sophomore at Aragon High School. I have two kids in Burrell Middle School. So I just wanted to comment on the equity part of distributing the Chromebooks and having internet access. Even before the pandemic, I've already kind of, talked to board members about, having our students be issued Chromebooks and stuff like that. And then when the pandemic hit, I think the at least the Foster City, San Mateo Foster City Schools District did a good job at distributing that and doing some hotspots for every kid. And I think that made a big difference. Because even though we had distance learning, there were some issues with internet access, whether it be overcrowded or whatever. So I really appreciated that, and then it also continued on throughout the school years. But I do agree that when we returned back to school in person, they used technology a lot, and I was really turned off by that. I think in the high school level, it would be a practical practice to have everyone have a Chromebook and to, find out which kids don't have internet, um, and provide hotspots for them because it does make a difference when they have to do homework or whatever it is. So I'm for that idea of it's just an equity thing. And even some kids that may not be, economically challenged may need that Chromebook or also the hotspot. And then I thought about you guys talking about critical thinking. I'm not sure if I was following the the conversation, but I I'm not sure how the Chromebook comes in hand, but I know that um, teaching, I mean, a lot of times it's discussions where we learn how to be critical thinkers, right? And the teachers guiding them and asking questions and kind of helping the kids to formulate to just get the idea of what critical thinking, like guiding them into that. And I actually was really lucky to have really good teachers in middle school and in high school that really guided our class and how to be critical thinkers and how to ask the questions and think of questions. We did that in U.S. history class. We did that in middle school. I learned that in language arts class, maybe in reading class when we were reading even like Shakespeare or whatever it is. We just had a really good teacher that really talked about critical thinking, and that was in seventh grade. Um, and I had a really good, U.S. history teacher that taught us how to think critically, and ask the right questions while we're reading and discussing history. Also in high school, I had the same thing. Um, and also in English class and whatever, civics or whatever. It is critical thinking is all part of a discussion, right? Where the teacher leads and it teaches our kids how to critically think and then how to, that just sets them up for, you know, higher education too. So I think I'm not sure how the computer will help with critical thinking. I mean, maybe we ask Siri, we can ask Google. That might be a part of it, but I'm not sure what AI is at this point. I kind of missed the first half of the meeting. But that's my comments on that. And then for kids with special needs, I do have
I-
a daughter in
I
special
have,
needs.
sorry, let me, your time is up. I can give you 30 more seconds and then
Okay,
we will,
I do have
sorry
a
about
daughter
that.
in special needs, and I feel like with technology, I mean, my child was okay with that, but being as a parent, I'm very technically challenged myself. And so luckily my kids knew how to use their Chromebooks and stuff like that, and I was kind of following along. But I think for kids with disability or even learning differences, and at the high school level, I mean, a lot of kids are very independent. They've learned how to, you know, kind of work their way through or hide their disability or whatever. And that's true. I agree with um, someone that said, yeah, there are a lot of kids that are undiagnosed, and there are a lot of, challenges that especially high schoolers are dealing with, like anxiety or whatever else, puberty, everything else that's going through their minds. So, you know, I think just having that equity level, or I don't know, I heard you say something like that.
Yeah, thank
but
you. Yeah.
math, well, that, I just thought I'd add my 2 cents in that. Thank
No,
you
I
very much.
appreciate it. Thank
your
you for
time.
your comment.
Listen.
Thank you very much. Thank you for
Mhm.
paying attention. I appreciate it.
I'm trying. Thank you for
No,
following.
that's great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Hope it was helpful.
Do we have anybody else online? Great.
Not that I can see.
Okay. So in closing, is there anything else that y'all have to,
I just
want
want
to
to
talk about?
I just
or-
want to thank everybody, the presentation and the discussion
Uh-huh.
from everybody, including my colleagues. It was great. So thank
Yeah,
you very
Thank
much.
you.
Again, I'm sorry I'm late, but I saw next steps. What's next after this?
Right. Good point. Yes.
So we're gonna end school.
Yes.
Right.
I kind of knew that.
14 days or whatever it is. Uh-huh.
Just kidding.
Smarty pants.
We are gonna convene folks starting in the fall in groups. There's like 5 themes we're gonna be engaged with and have some key leaders, both teachers and administrators, leading key kind of task forces in the fall to take on the various aspects of this. The other big thing we talked about earlier was just giving some guidance at the beginning of the school year to kids and families about students and families about buyer beware and privacy and all that sort of stuff with regard to AI. And then lastly, you all will be approving a policy, some policy changes that we think are warranted sometime in the middle of the fall.
Great. Yes, and I also want to say thank you so much for this presentation. Everybody that, participated in putting it together. Thank you for coming to our district and speaking to us. And thank you to our board for the great questions and dialogue. But I also wanted to thank our families online. We do these study sessions, so so there's some transparency and also some like really specific thinking about what we're doing, and what we're